Picture a town where the dawn arrives quietly, the sky a pale sheet of gray, the air cool with yesterday's rain still lingering on the pavement. In the little community of Clearwater, people move slowly, doors open and close with gentle ease, and mornings carry the scent of strong coffee and buttered toast right down Main Street. In the center of town stands a diner whose windows glisten from the drizzle, and inside that diner walks a young woman named Emily. Each day she steps out of the modest apartment she shares with her unwell mother, slips into her uniform with its faded blue trim, and begins another shift. Her shoes are scuffed from long hours, her smile firm yet kind, and she carries more than trays of breakfast. She carries hope. Before she even takes her first order, she's seen the regular rhythms of this town, the friendly nods, the rain tapping on the windows like a steady heartbeat, the sizzle of the griddle singing a comforting tune. At precisely 8:10 a.m., the door opens to admit Mr. Williams, a gentle old teacher in a worn gray overcoat and a brown felt hat. He glides into the diner and takes his place in the same booth by the window, ordering black coffee, 2 slices of toast, and scrambled eggs every single morning. His hands tremble when he lifts the cup. He stares out into the rain as though the world beyond the glass is a memory. The staff bring him his breakfast and move on, but Emily slows, offers a warm greeting, checks that his toast is properly buttered, and once slipped him a small piece of pie just because. She notices his silence, the loneliness that shadows him, the absence of conversation in his eyes. Over time, she quietly learns that he once taught history, that he lost his wife years ago, and now lives alone in a modest house just outside town, his children far away. She too carries burdens of her own. Her mother's illness weighs on her evenings, the bills grow taller each month, and sometimes she skips meals so her mother can eat. Yet each morning she rises, slips into that familiar blue uniform, rearranges her hair in a neat ponytail, and greets Mr. Williams with a steady kindness. Their lives in parallel, her struggle and his solitude. At times they pause for a few words. How was the weather? How was your morning? Until one day he says softly, "You remind me of my daughter." And in that moment, Emily knows this morning ritual is more than breakfast service. It is connection. Because helping him, even in small ways, reminds her that maybe life wasn't all struggle. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. It was a bitter morning in Clearwater when the snow began to fall, thick and soundless, blanketing the diner's windows in white. Inside, Emily refilled sugar jars, her mind half on the clock and half on the door, waiting for the familiar chime that always announced Mr. Williams's arrival. But the bell never rang. His booth by the window sat empty, the coffee pot still warm, the plate she usually saved for him untouched. She told herself maybe he'd overslept, or the cold had kept him home. Yet as the hours passed, her unease grew heavier. By afternoon, she was glancing toward that empty seat between orders, her smile a little thinner, her hands a little slower. It was strange how absence could echo louder than words, how one missing face could make the whole place feel incomplete. The next morning arrived with sharper winds and colder air, but still no sign of Mr. Williams. Day after day his booth remained untouched, and even the regulars began to notice. Emily wiped down his table though no one sat there, polished his cup though it was never used. On the 3rd day, she couldn't stand the quiet worry anymore. During her short break, she slipped into the back room, pulled out her phone, and called the small local hospital. Her heart pounded as she waited on hold, fingers twisting the hem of her apron. When the nurse finally spoke, Emily's breath caught. Mr. Williams had been admitted 2 nights earlier after falling at home. He was stable, the nurse said softly, but resting alone. Without hesitation, Emily wrapped a warm muffin from the diner in a napkin and caught the first bus across town. The hospital smelled faintly of antiseptic and soft winter air. Emily found his room after asking twice for directions, and when she stepped through the door, Mr. Williams looked smaller somehow. Frail, but still wearing that familiar calm in his eyes. Surprise flickered across his face when he saw her. "Emily," he whispered, voice trembling with disbelief. She smiled and held up the muffin. "You missed breakfast," she said gently. His laugh came out weak but warm, and for the first time in days the lines of worry on her face softened. She promised she'd visit every day until he got better. The nurses watched quietly from the hallway as she talked and adjusted his blanket, whispering among themselves about the waitress from Main Street, who seemed to carry sunlight in her voice. For the next week, Emily kept her promise. Between morning shifts and late-night classes, she stopped by his room, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with a single flower from a roadside stand. Even on days when exhaustion pressed heavily on her shoulders, she never forgot. She told him about the diner, about the regulars, about the cat that kept sneaking behind the counter. And Mr. Williams listened, smiling faintly, as though those small stories kept him tethered to something gentle and real. When he was finally discharged, he asked the nurse to call the diner. He wanted to thank her in person. That Friday morning, the bell above the door jingled again at exactly 8:10 a.m. The diner had never felt so alive. Emily turned, half expecting another customer, and froze when she saw him. Mr. Williams, a little slower, leaning on his cane, his smile thin, but determined. Every conversation in the diner fell silent as he crossed the floor toward his booth. Emily rushed forward, helped him into his seat, and hung his coat carefully on the rack beside him. "You didn't think I'd miss your coffee forever, did you?" he murmured. She laughed, eyes glistening, and set his breakfast before him with extra care. When the meal was done, he looked at her for a long moment and said quietly, "You remind me of my daughter." Emily smiled, the words washing over her with unexpected warmth, unaware that in that single sentence lay the promise of everything that would change her life. A few quiet months had passed since Mr. Williams's return to the diner. The snow had melted into streams along the sidewalks. The air smelled faintly of rain and spring dust, and Clearwater's mornings had returned to their familiar rhythm. Emily worked her usual shift. Same smile, same calm warmth. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The booth by the window no longer carried the same life. Mr. Williams had stopped coming as often, though he'd promised to visit when he could. That morning began like all the others. The coffee brewing, the bell above the door ringing with every new face, until it rang once more, and the room went completely still. It wasn't Mr. Williams who entered, but 4 men in dark suits followed by 2 lawyers holding leather folders. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, forks paused halfway to mouths. The men looked around the diner until one of them asked in a firm but gentle voice, "Is there someone here named Emily?" Her hands froze around the coffee pot. "I'm Emily," she said cautiously. The taller lawyer stepped forward, his tone respectful yet heavy with meaning. "Miss Emily, we represent Mr. Williams." The words hung in the air. Before she could reply, he extended a sealed envelope with her name handwritten across the front in shaky, familiar cursive. The sound of the diner dimmed until all she could hear was her heartbeat. "Mr. Williams passed away last week," the lawyer continued quietly. "He asked us to deliver this personally." Emily's breath caught. For a moment, she couldn't move. Her fingers trembled as she took the envelope. The chatter, the clinking dishes, the hum of the jukebox, everything faded into silence. She barely heard the lawyer's final words. "He spoke very highly of you." Later, sitting in the small booth where he used to eat, Emily unfolded the letter inside. The paper smelled faintly of his aftershave, the edges soft and worn. In his neat handwriting, Mr. Williams thanked her for every morning she'd brightened, every smile she'd shared, and for reminding him that compassion still existed in a world that too often forgot. He wrote that her kindness had made his final years bearable, that she'd become the daughter he thought he'd lost to time. Behind the letter was a folded document, a deed transferring ownership of his modest home and a sum of savings enough to pay her mother's medical bills in full. Her eyes blurred as she read the line, You were the only one who treated me like family. That evening, after her shift ended, Emily walked slowly to the edge of town where Mr. Williams's small house stood beneath an old oak tree. The porch creaked under her feet, and inside the air felt still, as though the walls were holding their breath. The rooms were lined with books stacked neatly beside a worn recliner, framed photographs of students, and soft light filtering through thin curtains. On the desk by the window sat a small frame she had never seen before, a photograph of her and Mr. Williams laughing one morning when she'd spilled coffee on the counter. A regular had snapped it without her noticing. He'd framed it. Emily pressed her fingers against the glass, tears falling silently onto the wood. She realized then that kindness had given him peace in his final days, and in return, he'd given her more than she'd ever dared to hope for: security, stability, and a lasting reminder that love doesn't vanish with time. It echoes quietly through the lives it touches. As the last light of evening streamed through the window, Emily whispered, "Thank you," her voice barely louder than the wind outside. She promised she would keep his memory alive by living the same way she had served him, gently, sincerely, with kindness that asked for nothing in return. Sometimes the smallest gestures leave the deepest marks. And maybe, just maybe, that's the legacy we're meant to leave behind. Before you go, let me ask you this. How far can one simple act of kindness reach? Tell us in the comments what small act of kindness you believe can change someone's day. Your story might be the spark that inspires another. And before you leave, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another true story that reminds us there is still goodness in this world.